Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Joseph Lackland here. In this episode of the Weekend Market Report, we are going to be checking the Sunday Globex Open Futures contracts for the market reaction to the latest round of news headlines that are hitting the wires. Apparently, the Strait is closed again, and Trump is making some more threats that if the Iranians do not comply with the said demands from the Pentagon and White House, that there's going to be more escalation of hostility in the Persian Gulf. We have an active naval blockade, which has been there for about a week. That was implemented last weekend, and that is an attempt to basically choke off the trade routes where the ships can come in and out of, so that Iran does not have access to basic necessities like food and supplies. And this also affects the global economy, because a very large percentage of a lot of key elements that we depend on for day-to-day life come through there as well. The fertilizers and liquefied natural gas and of course crude oil. So this is obviously a major development in the modern world. It is affecting everybody. It is driving up the price of crude oil. It's driving up the price of gasoline. It's going to cause, eventual shortages of, supplies in the future if this persists, and that's going to translate to obviously even more inflation for everybody. So the focus of today's episode is going to be what is the reaction of the market to the latest round of news, and also we're going to be going back a week and we're going to do a study of how did the naval blockade come about? What were the events leading up to the implementation of the naval blockade and the subsequent historic price action in crude oil last week as a result of all the news headlines that were, hitting the wires? I've collected a bunch of news stories with a few itemized matchups with the price of crude oil, and what we're going to do is we're going to use a couple large language models to construct a timeline and look at how the story develops and what this does to the crude oil price and the price of the stock market. The stock market, of course, had a historic 12, 13-day rally in indexes. NASDAQ was up about 3,000 points last week. S&P rallied about 350, closing at a record high of around 7165. The Dow Jones had a historic rally as well. Crude oil ended the week down about 12% here. If we go to the crude oil weekly summary here from a little bit of data, we have the previous close April 10th at 95.63, the weekly high 105.25 that was made on Sunday night. We will look at that on the chart. The weekly low 83.12 and the weekly range 22.13. So at about $100, that's about a 22% range. The weekly close was 84.38. That's NYMEX. The actual price that went off last is around 85.50. Weekly change $11. Percentage weekly change, like I said, around down 12%. These futures are going to open here in about 30 seconds, so we will shift the focus to the futures. And let me move the screen over here so you guys can still see me and what I'm doing here. Quick look at that crude oil recap right here, 95.63, weekly high 105.25, weekly low 83.12, weekly range 22.13, weekly close 84.38, change 11.25, weekly change down about 12%. It is 5 p.m. Let's check in and let's see what is happening here. We have crude oil on a gap higher, $89, closed at $85.50. It looks like the opening is the low. We're already up about $1.50 from that low. We're regaining the 90 level. Let's check in with the S&P market. We'll use the NASDAQ as well, but the S&P is the more widely recognized benchmark. Okay, so we got a 60 handle gap down in the S&P right off the bat. So the market is obviously interpreting the news over the weekend as not favorable to risk assets and favorable to crude oil. This is the typical manic depressive behavior that we see lately with the corresponding news headlines. So let's go back and let's look at what news headlines were actually creating this today. So we're going to do basically the headline on Zero Hedge. Zero Hedge is okay for information. It's usually pretty accurate. It does change, though, as a lot of these news headlines do change. The headline will change. If you read an article and you notice the timestamp on it, you could, screenshot it on your phone is what I like to do. And then you can check it, 15, 20 minutes later or 30 minutes later, and it'll change. And then it'll have a new timestamp on there. So the news continues to change as we progress through the, timeline. So what you read 1 minute may or may not be necessarily what the story is the next minute, because one news source will put out a story and cite a source, and then another news event will come out from a different source, and it'll cloud that previous claim, or it'll directly label it as false. It's very difficult to tell what's really happening here, and that's what the whole idea is of tracking the news headlines with the price of crude oil lately has been. It's what I'm trying to do to organize everything that is happening. So the basic premise of what's going on here is that the U.S. has retaliated and struck and seized an Iranian cargo ship trying to break the blockade. Once again, every news story, this is what the news story is telling you. What is actually happening? What is the reaction? Let's try and break it down. So Trump renews some threats if no deal is reached. No more Mr. Nice Guy. Typical, huffing and puffing behavior from the White House. Trump says U.S. struck and seized Iranian flagged cargo ship in Gulf of Oman. Tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz is ground to a halt after multiple incidents. Iran renewed threats to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Well, this is a drastic turnaround from Friday morning, where the strait was declared open and we have a deal and the ceasefire is working, and basically a 180-degree turnaround from what transpired on Friday morning, early Friday morning. And the U.S. has struck and seized Iranian flagged cargo ship here, with markets still closed for now. Now the market's open. We can obviously see the immediate reaction, a gap higher in crude and a gap lower in ES. We hit 70.85 so far. First 5 minutes of trading. We have a 30-25 handle range in ES, and we have a almost 200 tick range in crude, $2 range in crude, up about $5 or $6 from 85.50. So obviously anybody that is short this market is they're in a little bit of trouble here if they don't cover right now. That's why you see that immediate reaction right off the bat. Let's finish going through this article. The U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer USS Bruns intercepted the Tok USA in the Gulf of Oman, gave them fair warning to stop. It says that the crew refused to listen, so our Navy ship stopped them right in their tracks by blowing a hole in the engine room. Well, that will definitely get their attention now, won't it? Right now, U.S. Marines have custody of the vessel, so they probably captured the vessel, probably had to board the vessel, and something went down right there. And the article goes on to describe, what exactly transpired. It outlines that the tanker traffic through the strait is halted, so this is obviously not what everybody was expecting. And we have some confirmation. Both sides seem to have confirmed this behavior. So this is not misinformation or fake news or anything like that. This is actually happening, but the interpretation obviously is up to the news media source where it's going to come from. So Vance once again is negotiating with Iran via Pakistan and via some other mediation. We're not exactly sure what is transpiring out of these meetings. We understand that the effect what we're going to see later, basically. And that will do it for this weekend's news. There's not too much to really, dive into here. We went into the weekend under the impression that, things were getting better as far as, conflict was de-escalating, and that, there was more hope of a, definitive plan to, stop the fighting and, reopen the strait so that supplies could roll through. But that obviously has not happened. We're, 50 days into this war officially. It was supposed to last a few days, and then it was going to last a few more weeks, and now here we are a few more weeks later, and it's probably going to last at least a little bit longer now given the current developments, because we can't seem to arrive on any sort of peace deal. The ceasefire was in effect. There were several violations of the ceasefire, both in the Israel theater and also in the Iran and U.S. theater, but we have a couple of theaters of war simultaneously operating in the world right now. We have one in Ukraine and Russia, and we have, of course, one with Israel and their targets that they've been relentlessly attacking for weeks. And now, of course, we have the United States with a full-blown naval blockade in Iran, which has caused the Iranians to close the strait. So what happened last week? How did last weekend's news onslaught, how did that affect the market, and where did it start? Well, it started on Sunday evening. And I have pulled a timeline. I used Gemini to do this. So I had Gemini grab about 30 news stories from Sunday morning of last week until about Tuesday. And the prompt I gave it was, I want to collect a few news stories about the Iran war, oil, and developments each day and construct a timeline for a video presentation, the one I'm giving right now. Do I have to collect the links and read the material to review it, or can a large language model such as this do it for me? And it gave me an answer. It said I can grab all of this stuff, and I said, okay, let's grab it all. And I have organized the list into a text file right here, and it says I cannot view the text file. I think I downloaded the text file. Let me see if I can find it here. This would be the first one. Yeah, here we go. So this is going to be War and Oil Master Timeline with matching. My picture is in the way. Give me 1 second. Okay, let me get a bigger font so that you guys can read that. All right, that's a little bit of a bigger font. It should be easier to read. Let me check that we are invisible range. Okay, so Sunday, April 12th, 2026, and I've checked some of these myself. We're going to go through and we're going to, actually look at some of these articles. I did some data verification. There are some things that are not exactly correct, but we will identify those and itemize those as we go. War and oil master timeline with matching CL futures closes, and we're going to do 12 to the 13th, 2026. So this is Sunday through Tuesday. We're going to match it up using CL 5-minute bars, which I have extracted from my my data feed here. Sunday, April 12th, the diplomatic collapse is what the large language model summarized this as 7:13 a.m. Islamabad peace talks officially collapse while markets closed. Iran cites excessive demands by U.S. negotiators. President Trump's Truth Social blockade announcement. So the president announced that the blockade would be happening. 8:07. WTI crude gaps up to 104. See, this is where the data was a little bit confused. CENTCOM details impartial enforcement rules. Lebanon strike intensity increases. This is Israel's violation of the ceasefire. U.S. destroyers enter Strait of Hormuz. China issues stark warning on energy security. I would like to mention that a lot of China's oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. So they're on a little bit of an energy crunch right now, along with a lot of other Pacific nations. Brent crude hits 102. We're not sure yet. Advanced security threats end diplomatic window. So they basically just, packed it up and said, okay, forget this. We're not messing with this anymore for right now. Sunday overnight, 5:02 p.m. global market. Brent hits limit up. CL closed 104.68. So we're going to start the timeline right there. And we're going to look at the gap opening higher last weekend. So last weekend, at this particular point in the timeline, we're going to use this little yellow thing to mark our position on the timeline. We had a gap up. We opened at 102. We instantly screamed to 105.50. And the market takes a dump. The S&P was 300 lower at this point. So it's a gap opening down in the ES. And now we're going to track the timeline with the price of crude here. So at 6:15, Tehran issues red alert. Sirens reported. Closed 104.91. At 7:30 p.m., Japan convenes an emergency cabinet. AUD, this was interesting. I didn't catch this one, but it found that AUD, New Zealand dollar currency flash crash. So there's a little currency rebalancing going on and people getting out of the Australian dollar, New Zealand dollar, and going into United States dollars. China BBOC injects 500 billion of yuan liquidity. So they're doing a little quantitative easing there in response to the crisis. IRGC missile convoy movement. So Iran is moving missiles around and, obviously getting ready for the next phase here. So that will take us to 11:10 p.m. So let's move the marker to 11 p.m. Let's just say midnight. Okay. So as of this development, we have the S&P recovering the top of the opening range. It's still inside the gap, but now it's still lower than the close, but now it's inside the gap is what I was trying to say. And so because it's inside the gap, this is the island reversal sort of scenario where the market gaps lower and then breaks out of the opening range and starts trading into the gap, right? So this happens within the first couple of hours. We could see that crude oil overnight now starts to move. And we could see first we see the spike in the ES. So the ES starts to spike at about 5:55 in the morning. Let's go to the morning, Monday, April 13th, the naval blockade at 1:20. UK Foreign Office says leave now order for the Gulf. 2:45 global tanker divergence anchoring confirmed. So ships are dropping anchor in the in the strait or surrounding the strait because they're not going to be able to move through it. So of course they're going to shut off their engines and they're going to drop anchor and they're going to try and wait it out. EU Emergency Energy Council call 104 at 4:05 a.m. 5:15 a.m. pre-dawn briefing on blockade. 6 o'clock a.m. oil hits $150 a barrel. Physical dated Brent peak. So there's a physical market for crude oil. And if you actually wanted the physical barrels of crude oil itself, they were trading apparently way ahead of the futures contract. So if you actually needed the crude oil at that exact moment, prices were said to be around $150 a barrel, right? So we have 150 in the spot, or if you actually need the price of crude oil, and the futures are still at 104. That's very strange. I've never really seen anything like this before. So maybe you could tell me, in the comments, or just what exactly is happening here? Like, what is going on here? How is the spot price 150 if you actually want the physical, but the futures are still trading at 104? So after that, at 6:45, we have a wire alert. Islamabad failure officially confirmed. 9 o'clock a.m. is when the naval blockade officially goes live. That's when the press release was, or some type of official conference from the White House. So that will take us to about 9 a.m. here. So at 9 a.m. you can definitely see that the market is reacting to the official blockade announcement release. This is also 30 minutes after the market opens, so there's a lot of volume that trades there anyway at 8:30, but most of it now is up, and we can see that the crude oil got sold about 5 or 10 minutes into this announcement. So we have the major official blockade announcement, and with the stock market takes off, and the stock market is pretty much bid until the rest of the day. That this orange line, crude oil, ends the day significantly lower at 97.5. It lost the gap low on the open. So the equity market had started to recover the gap overnight, but we really lost the crude oil bull move on the open. So the equity market moved first, and the crude oil moved a little bit later, but still ended the day down quite a bit from its high. That's almost a $9-10 move here in crude. So that's a 10% gap up with a 10% reversal here. Let's go to the news headlines that were coming out during the day that were influencing that move that started on the open and persisted all the way until the close. 10:14, we have an IDF strike, kills a Hezbollah commander. Beijing denies arms supplies to Tehran. White House press briefing on blockade legality. So they're trying to, obviously do some explaining to the public here on what this thing actually is and what it's doing. First tanker Pacific Glory turned back, so that's the first indication that no ship is going to go through. UN Secretary General warns act of war. IMO warns thousands of stranded seafarers. And Monday market settled Brent near 148.40. That's the data point that's not exactly right. The Brent was still trading, roughly around WTI. That this is the spot price here that was still transacting in the wake of the fresh news. So if we go to the first series of articles that we were going to check. So I checked the main one. So how I did that is I used a prompt here for Google News, and I input these prompts into Google News. And here's the one from Bloomberg that corresponds to this one right here. And then we have the UN one. So this is from the United Nations, and I think that the title of it changed since, because when I put it in here, it took me to this, but it does mention the shipping trade disrupted, which was the topic of the article. And what the main takeaway from this article is in normal times, 35% of global crude oil, some 20 million barrels, along with 30% of fertilizer trade and a fifth of liquefied natural gas passes through the Strait of Hormuz daily, according to the UN Food and Agriculture Organization. Disruptions in maritime trade have already had direct effects in the region and beyond, with increased global economic fragility and insecurity in many sectors. The UN warned that disruption of fertilizer and its inputs further exacerbate food insecurity for millions of vulnerable people around the world, adding to the rising cost of living due to impacts from fuel, transportation, and supply chain disruptions. Against this backdrop, engagement continues with relevant parties on the design and operation of the recently appointed UN task force on the Strait of Hormuz, the statement said. So we have lots of people trying to negotiate with both sides trying to get this reopened. Moreover, the Secretary General's personal envoy for the Middle East conflict, Jean Arnault, remains actively engaged in the region, consulting closely with key stakeholders and continuing his outreach support of a comprehensive and durable agreement. So we have the UN and Pakistan and a few other mediators trying to find a solution to this before the crisis gets any worse. The next article was the United Nations ceasefire extension, or this was I think this might have been the act of war one. And U.S.-Iran talks falter, Strait of Hormuz uncertainty deepens. Tanks fail to yield agreement. This is obviously having to do with the blockade. Tanks fail to yield agreement, or talks fail to yield agreement. Sorry, tanks. I thought I was reading tanks there. UN chief urges continued diplomacy. We just touched on that. They said it was a positive and meaningful step toward the talks at that time. Hormuz tensions escalates. The Strait of Hormuz remains a key flashpoint, with the U.S. announcing a blockade targeting Iranian ports, heightening concerns around maritime traffic and global trade. We just discussed the impact of that. Lebanon humanitarian crisis deepens. Civilian casualties continue to rise. Israel continues to attack Lebanon at this time. UNIFIL vehicle. UN peacekeepers report that an Israeli tank rammed UN vehicles, raising concerns over the safety of personnel. So apparently there's just all kinds of, spillover from all kinds of military operations going wrong over there. The article, goes on to describe other elements of the war that are not directly related to the U.S. and Iran right now. The other scenes that are unfolding in the other theater, like I said. We have the IMF blog. We have an IMF warning here. How the war in the Middle East is affecting energy, trade, and finance. Growth warning, right? How this is affecting the world. Well, what's going on here, right? And so this one goes on to describe energy prices, supply chains, and financial markets are the main transmission channels, but the regional effects will vary significantly. And then we'll just read the first couple of lines here. The world faces yet another shock. The war in the Middle East is upending lives and livelihoods in the region and beyond. It is also dimming the outlook for many economies that had only just shown signs of a sustained recovery from previous crises. So some of these nations and regions are just getting over a crisis or are already in a crisis, and now there's a huge new crisis that is developing. The shock is global, yet asymmetric. Energy importers are more exposed than exporters, poorer countries more than richer ones. There are already fuel shortages and restrictions in place for some of these less developed and more vulnerable regions and nations. Beyond its painful human toll, the war has caused serious disruption to the economies of the most directly affected countries. So the news is obviously very extensive, and it is very very negative as far as what the outcome is for all parties involved, being the globe, seeing as how global trade flows through the Strait of Hormuz. We have a ceasefire extension confusion at the AP News. Here's the AP. Pakistani delegation meets in Tehran, hoping for more U.S.-Iran talks before ceasefire ends. So here is the article here. Once again, Pakistan has emerged as a key mediator in this process during the ceasefire. Since the ceasefire announcement, they got involved, and obviously both sides are able to talk to Pakistan and have Pakistan effectively mediate. Even though they can't reach an agreement, Pakistan is probably a good effective mediator for both sides, relatively unbiased. So there's that, and then the Hormuz Strait reopening. Obviously, that news hit the wire on Friday. So throughout this, we have had several large swings in the market over the week. This is Tuesday, and let's go to the more complete timeline on Tuesday. And I've gone through the timeline. This is Claude. I use Claude for a lot of tasks. And what I did is, I started with Gemini, right? So I got some news stories from Gemini. Then I put them into ChatGPT. And then I gave ChatGPT this data file of CL 5-minute data. I matched it up with the prices. And then after I did that, I gave it to Claude, and then I had Claude fill in the rest with the ideas. So in order to bring you this information today, there were quite a few maneuvers performed by these large language models in order to organize this stuff and get it together properly. And then, I spent about 30 minutes or an hour verifying some of this data, and some of these news sites, they want you to pay, like Reuters and Bloomberg, but I was able to get the news headline matched up with the timestamp. And you have to be careful of the timestamps, because sometimes the timestamp is when the news article is updated, not necessarily when it came out. So you've got to check that, and there's a way to check that in the metadata. So some of this stuff is when it came out, and some of this stuff is, when it got updated. So we went through Sunday to Tuesday. Let's look at the 13th, which is Tuesday during the day. So we have 120. Oh, this is still Monday. Because it gave me 6 days for Sunday here. Tuesday. So 14:205 a.m. That's not right. It says 105. I think this is Brent. Brent was trading ahead of CL. So we're going to focus on CLWTI. 6:27 a.m. on, actually, you know what, let's use the price action instead. So on Monday, the market tanks and closes at around 97.50. My line disappeared. Okay, so here we've got this, and now overnight there's this big drop here at 145. So let's look for the April 14th. Let's start on April 14th. U.S. Navy destroyer interdicts 2 oil tankers leaving Iran's Chabahar port, orders turnback radio. 4:14 a.m. a little bit later. Macron and Starmer announced joint virtual summit April 17th to coordinate defensive multilateral mission. Crude oil starts to travel down from right there. This is where the market starts to pick up here. Well, once again, at about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, another very powerful rally starts. And here are the news headlines that go with that. So Trump Truth Social, China very happy about Hormuz opening, claims Beijing agreed not to arm Iran. So the narrative is starting to get a little bit better. Israel, Lebanon direct peace talks in Washington. So we had some peace talks that began in Washington for Israel, Lebanon. So that was more indication that, you know, maybe this is going to stop. And now IMF slashes MENA 2026 growth forecast to 1.1 at 9:30. Has no effect whatsoever. Market's still going up. Market is still going down. Crude oil basically trends down all day on the 14th. So we have a few positive news headlines that come out on Tuesday. The market goes down all day. So basically the market started up here on Sunday night and completely reversed course and is now getting sold aggressively now. So on the implementation of the blockade, the initial reaction was complete panic, and then, you know, the hope starts to set in again that, you know, things are going to get better. 11 a.m. Trump tells New York Post second Iran talks could be happening over the next 2 days. And then after hours, CENTCOM, Admiral Brad Cooper, blockade fully implemented. So the blockade is officially fully implemented at the close of the market on Tuesday, April 15th. Let's go to the 15th. Overnight, the crude oil market gets immediately hit at right before Asia. So it goes down a lot. It goes down $4 in about 10 minutes here. So this thing gets crushed even harder and the market goes nowhere. And now that's going to bring us to the news headline, looks like around 4 a.m. is the next one. So CENTCOM Admiral Brad Cooper Post blockade fully implemented. 90% of Iran's sea trade completely halted in less than 36 hours. Iranian armed forces threaten to block Persian Gulf, Sea of Oman, Red Sea if U.S. blockade continues. Let's corroborate that with our... Okay, so now the prices are right. These prices were not right before. So there was some contamination of the data here, but now these prices are right. Fox Business Mornings with Maria as Trump has a pre-recorded interview, and that was 5 a.m. So we start that right here, about 5 a.m. AP Wire published 7:12 a.m. U.S. and Iran have in-principle agreement. So the extending the ceasefire. So here is all extend ceasefire talk. The market is consolidating. Equities and indexes continue to move higher right here. Senior U.S. official denies formal ceasefire extension, has not formally agreed. It was an idea. Siri Island oil refinery fire. More oil refineries going up in flames, more attacks on oil refineries. And this is happening not only in the Persian Gulf. Ukraine is attacking Russian oil refineries too. So the global oil supply is definitely in trouble here. Oil recovery extends, stocks surge near record highs as ceasefire. So the market is now fully in the hope and upside panic of the ceasefire, actually working out. So the market is very optimistic at this point that the war is going to stop, despite the escalation with the naval blockade. Bloomberg, U.S. and Iran considering 2-week ceasefire and extension. This is a story on Bloomberg. We don't know if this was actually true or if this was, prematurely put out there. White House presser talks productive and ongoing, 1:05 p.m. That will take us to the end of Wednesday, April 15th. So that'll take us to the end here. So basically things are getting better. Stock market continues to go up. Crude oil, already got hit really hard, is not recovering. So now we're going to go to Thursday. And it looks like the crude oil started to recover a little bit. And let's see what the corresponding news headlines were for that as well. So let's go to the 16th. Yeah, that's the 16th. Trade date the 16th. (2:05 a.m. Hegseth Kane press conference locked and loaded for resume combat. So it's not looking so good at the moment. Once again, not looking so good at the moment. We see the market start to move up. The crude starts at about 91 going into midnight, and now the market starts to move up at 2:00 a.m. That's when Hegseth made the announcement. So the market starts moving up pretty much right away. Equity market starts moving down a little bit, not down too much, not even close to not even down nearly as much as it just rallied, right? So the equity and indexes are giving up some gains, but not much. And crude oil is still extremely volatile, going from 91 to 95 before the close of the day. Blockade extended to Indo-Pacific Command. Intercepted vessels rise to 13. So there's 13 intercepted vessels so far. U.S. Joint Chiefs Kane and Secretary of Defense Hegseth clarify blockade covers all Iranian coastline. Translated to basically a lock on Iranian ports. Trump Truth Social. China very happy I am permanently opening the Strait of Hormuz. They agreed not to send weapons to Iran. So that was a confirmation from Trump that China's not helping Iran for now. CL hit session highs near 94.37, largest intraday range of blockade period driven by ceasefire extension optimism. Trump arrives to Las Vegas for no tax on tips tax day. Has not really much to do with the war. Trump in Las Vegas remarks war in Iran is going along swimmingly. It should be ending pretty soon. Hints at imminent deal. Watch what happens in the next week or so. Yes, we're all watching. Sir, we're all watching. Trump Truth Social invites Netanyahu and Lebanon President Aoun to White House. First meaningful talks between countries since 1983. So attempting to defuse the Israel-Lebanon situation. Trump announces 10-day Israel-Lebanon ceasefire at 8 p.m. on Thursday, April 16th. 8 p.m. Thursday, April 16th. Lebanon, ceasefire. Looks like the move started. The announcement was at 8 o'clock. This is in the morning. This is overnight on the 17th. No, 8 p.m. on the 16th. Nothing happened until several hours later. So the story was 10-day Israel-Lebanon ceasefire begins 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Thursday, midnight. The time is wrong. These times are in Central. So 8 p.m. Thursday, April 16th. I'm going to have a talk with Claude. I think Claude screwed up this part here. The news stories are right, but it is not corresponding with the price. What happened at 8 p.m. on the 16th? So right here, nothing, and then the next day, this is Friday now. This is when the final announcement basically came out. And the final announcement was overnight that the strait was reopening. And the reason is that the ceasefire was going well and that the United States and Iran were going to agree to stop fighting and open the strait. So some sort of agreement was supposedly made and put in place, which we now know has completely reversed in a couple of days. But let's go through it. Let's go through it anyway. Israel-Lebanon 10-day ceasefire takes effect 5 p.m. Eastern Time Thursday, midnight CST Friday. Fireworks light Beirut skylines. Still problems in Lebanon. CL futures drop sharply. European overnight session reacts to Lebanon ceasefire. 97.39 and 95.50. That's Brent. WTI is slightly lower. At this point on Friday, the base is building. The big rally doesn't start yet. The big rally starts at 3:35 a.m., so about an hour and a half after London opens for trading. Trump's Truth Social overnight warned Iran should be ending pretty soon. That's right about that time. Hour and a half after London. So here's the Trump Truth Social post right here. 7:25 oil crashes begin at 7:25 a.m. Let's move this now. Let's put the yellow line on the Trump Truth Social at shortly before. So here's the Trump Truth Social post hitting the market right here, 93.24. Okay, so the market starts getting crushed. Indexes start going up, not too much, but they start going up. Here's where the real insanity begins at 7:45. So the market was already weak going into there. Let's look at the next story. 7:25. Let's move our marker here. Okay, 7:25. Let's zoom in on that. Right here. What was the growing rumor? Hormuz announcement imminent. High volume pre-announcement bar. 7:45 a.m. 20 minutes later. Foreign Minister Aragachi, I think that's right, posts on X, Strait of Hormuz declared completely open for commercial vessels for remaining ceasefire period. Trump Truth Social immediate response. Iran has just announced that the Strait of Iran is fully open and ready for full passage. Thank you. That's at 7:50. So the crude oil market got trashed from 90 down to 85 in that 10 minutes. So this little window of time, this 7:25 to 7:45, a lot of trading took place on the tape. Lots of volume, huge price moves. Trump now proceeds to make multiple posts on Truth Social. Naval blockade will remain in full force and effect pertains to Iran only. 855, WTI is down about 12%. S&P 500 hits all-time highs simultaneously. So by then, the S&P is on an all-time high, and the crude is down 12%. CL hits session low near 80.56. Intraday bottom is 12% collapse completes. Recovery begins on caveat uncertainty. Then there's a recovery. CL bounces from lows as traders absorb that blockade remains in place and Hormuz opening may not normalize shipping immediately. Well, of course not. It's not going to go back to normal right away anytime soon. Macron-Starmer Hormuz summit in the UK demands toll-free independent passage. Now they're trying to figure out, how to get ships through there, pay for passage. That's dangerous precedent. But we already knew that there was a toll if you wanted to go through there. Trump on Air Force One, maybe I won't extend the ceasefire. Blockade is going to remain. Unfortunately, we have to start dropping bombs again. And now it's already starting to be walked back right here a little bit, but the main event has already transpired. The crude has been smashed and is trying to recover at this point, and the market is already on the all-time high and consolidating. And now we can see clearly the effect of the Sunday open on the new round of news that hits. So we've now gone full circle from last Sunday, which was things are getting worse, there's a naval blockade, to things are getting better and some peace talks start and stop, and then they stop the fighting for a little while and then they resume the fighting again, pretty much full force as negotiations fail. And that brings us to where we are right now. So it's about 45 minutes after Globex has opened. We have the gap opening lower once again, and we have the crude gap higher once again. So this is basically an identical setup with different prices. So if we go back, we had the gap opening up with the gap opening lower, and now the stock market is trading above right here. So it's trading back inside the gap from a gap opening lower. So that's exactly what's happening here as well. It's a gap opening lower, and now the market is trading back inside the opening gap here. So this once again might be the island reversal. I have a study in Python that we're going to look at in a later video of the gap opening island reversal, and we're going to be tracking the frequency of this occurrence for statistical analysis. And I will definitely upload that as soon as I'm done shooting it. But right now we have the same story in effect. The conflict is not being de-escalated. There are more problems. There are going to be more disruptions, and the two sides cannot reach a deal, and the strait is now closed. So the strait was open on Friday, and now the strait's closed again. So basically a complete repeat, almost identical to what happened last weekend. Things are getting worse. The blockade is in place. The fighting is going to continue. The disruptions and shortages are going to continue. Then they start to get better. And now we're right back to where we started. So that will conclude this week's edition of the Weekend Market Report on the Iran war, the media war for information, and the oil war in the futures markets. So once again, thank you for joining me, and I will see you on the next episode.